What do a Stormtrooper and Tony Stark have in common? Will we ever be able to make a bionic hand like that of Luke Skywalker? And is there a possibility in the future we'll ever get the opportunity to jump to hyperspace? In this video, I'm going to take a look at those questions and more as we are set to explore the science of Star Wars and other superheroes. Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Fitzgerald, the superhero scientist, and I'm delighted to be part of Ballinasloe Library's Comic Con. And today in this talk, I'm going to dive into some of the brilliant science and engineering that you'll find in Star Wars, but also is connected to the superhero genre. So right, let's get started. The Stormtrooper suit, the Iron Man suit, what do they have in common? Well, you might be thinking that's a peculiar question. When you think about it, they don't really seem to have anything in common. The Iron Man suit worn by Tony Stark is used for good, to fight the villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, while the Stormtrooper suit, well, that's worn by anyone who's serving the Empire in Star Wars. Well, they do have something in common because I've just mentioned it there. They're both suits, but they're a particular type of suit. They are exoskeleton suits. You might be wondering then, what is an exoskeleton suit? Well, we already have a skeleton, and that is the skeleton inside our bodies. That is an endoskeleton. Endo here meaning inside skeleton. An exoskeleton is something we wear outside our bodies. Exo here meaning outside. Now, we wear exoskeleton suits every single day. When you leave your house and you go out into the big world, well, you'll see not only yourself wearing it, but there are other people around you wearing exoskeleton suits. And I'm referring here to clothing, because clothing is a form of an exoskeleton suit that helps our body to thermoregulate and to keep a temperature at roughly around 37 degrees Celsius. In the depths of winter, you can imagine that, well, your body's going to need a little bit of extra help to stay warm, and that's where clothing comes to the fore. Now, other examples of exoskeleton suits can be found throughout history, and one example would be medieval armor, which was worn, of course, by knights when they were jousting or in battle. And in fact, this type of suit, which is a protective suit, has a lot in common with the Stormtrooper suit and with the Iron Man exoskeleton suit. In fact, of course, when these were worn by characters in the films, such as Finn or Tony Stark, they served to protect the wearer. Another example of an exoskeleton suit, well, is an astronaut suit. This suit creates an artificial living environment for a person so that they can, well, do a spacewalk outside of a spacecraft, but it also, of course, protects the wearer from the intense heat that they might feel when they're outside of a spacecraft in orbit around the Earth. And then there are scuba diving suits, which again create an artificial environment. Like the astronaut suit provided oxygen, the scuba diving suit also provides oxygen for someone, allowing people to go scuba diving, something I've never done and maybe I'll do in the future. Now, fortunately though, we are building other types of exoskeleton suits besides astronaut suits or scuba diving equipment. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about a couple of those right now. Here's the first example. This is the Rewalk system from Rewalk Robotics. Now, this is a brilliant exoskeleton suit as it's been designed to help those who are paralyzed from the waist down. And that means that's somebody who could be confined to a wheelchair and has lost the ability to walk or never had the ability to walk in the first place. Now, this is a brilliant piece of technology because it provides those who do not have mobility that many of us take for granted the opportunity to leave the confines of a wheelchair or other device and actually to get up and walk. Now, it's based on the operation of two crutches which have some controls, and there are a number of actuators or motors that are attached to the legs which help to move the legs. Now, this is a great piece of technology, but the only problem is it's quite expensive. Fortunately though, there are lots of people developing technologies like these around the world, and I'm sure in the future they'll start to get cheaper for people. Now, this is an active exoskeleton suit. It means that it's got electronic components. But there are passive suits out there, such as this one. A passive suit is a suit that does not contain electronic components. This is the Levio exoskeleton suit, and it's designed for those working in industry or logistics. So for example, if you were working in a job that required you to pick up things all the time or to be bent over for an extended period of your day, it acts to reduce the strain on your back if you're ever doing a job like that. And it could also even be used in hospitals, but worn by medical healthcare workers who are lifting patients from a bed and moving them to a trolley. The great thing about this suit is I've actually got one of these, and it's actually really cool, and perhaps if you see me present live in person, you might get the opportunity to actually see this suit. Right, there's a couple of examples of real-world exoskeleton suits. One which has been developed to give people back their mobility, to give people the opportunity to have the freedoms that many of us take for granted. And the other, which is a passive suit, has been designed to protect the body of the wearer and to reduce stress and strain on the back so they don't have injuries in the long term. The thing is though, exoskeleton suits like the Stormtrooper suit and the Iron Man suit, they do a lot more than just protect the wearer. In the films, we see both of these suits flying, and to be honest with the Iron Man suit, it's kind of the signature maneuver for the suit. I think if anyone ever gets one of these suits, they're going to want to be able to fly that because that's the big thing it does. But we need to think a little bit about how we could actually fuel these suits. And if you ever were going to be building a suit that could fly, what type of fuel should you be using? And I guess at this point, it's a good opportunity to be thinking sustainably already about the fuel you may use. So let's delve a little deeper into the potential fuels that might be used to get a Stormtrooper suit to fly or the Iron Man suit. Right, let's first of all consider the Stormtrooper suit and the fuel that was used to get that to fly in the Star Wars films. Now, the examples I'm going to use here are very much Earth-based, but perhaps in the Star Wars universe there are fuels like these that are available to the Empire to get the Stormtrooper suits to fly. One potential fuel option may be something like JP-8. Now, JP-8 is a kerosene-based fuel that is specifically designed for military aircraft. There is a version of this that is used in commercial aircraft that'll be to fly passengers around the world, but this one has been specifically designed for jet engines in military planes. Now, that could be one opportunity or one potential fuel for the Stormtrooper suits. Another may be RP-1, which is a rocket version of that kerosene fuel, specifically designed for rockets that will be launching into space. The thing that both of these fuels have in common with not only each other, but also, I think, the fuel used by the Empire for the Stormtrooper suits is that they are fossil fuel based. And of course, if we're going to build flying suits, probably not the best thing to be doing is using fossil fuels, taking into consideration everything in relation to sustainability. What about the Iron Man suit? Well, the Iron Man suit uses thrusters in the gauntlets or the gloves of the suit, but also there are thrusters in the boots and on the back. And it seems to me that Iron Man is not using any type of a fossil fuel based substance for these thrusters. It's more likely, in fact, that he is actually using something that's based on electrical energy and may also involve ion-based technology. And in fact, in one of the films, in Iron Man 3, we actually see the suit being charged by one of the characters because it ran out of charge, and I believe it was even just using a car battery or a very, very strong car battery to actually charge the suit. So perhaps if we were able to build a flying Iron Man suit and to power it without fossil fuels, electricity or even a battery-based approach might be good enough if you can make a battery that can store enough charge, that is, in the first place. Now, there are flying suits out there kind of like this one here. This is a flying suit designed by a company called Gravity, the founder of which is Richard Browning. Now, this is a quite innovative suit. It's actually quite brilliant. It's based on 5 jet engines and it uses some of that kerosene fuel that I mentioned earlier on, for the jet engines. It's a great suit and it really does fly. But there are a few drawbacks with the suit, and they include the following. Well, first of all, it'll only fly for roughly around 10 minutes. And the reason is that, well, you'll run out of fuel. And that's the other problem. Where do you keep the fuel? Well, guess what? You've got to carry the fuel in a pack on the back of the suit. Also, doesn't sound super practical, and that's probably what the Stormtrooper suits were actually doing in the film as well, is carrying the fuel with them. Not super practical for them either. And also, to actually fly this suit, you need to be super strong, have a really strong core, and you need to have intense core strength to be able to control, or what they call in aerodynamics of aircraft, vector the thrust being created by the engines so that you'll move in one direction and not the other. So it's super cool suit, but there's a lot of things to be thinking about. And the thing, of course, is that, well, it uses fossil fuels, kerosene-based fuels. And while I really want to see flying suits, I really do, I don't think that kerosene-based suits are the answer. However, I'm sure that this is just a first step towards a flying suit that's based on some sort of renewable energy source. Something like electrical energy, like we see with the Iron Man suit, or perhaps with the future iterations of the Stormtrooper suit. So indeed, the flying Stormtrooper suit and the Iron Man suit actually might represent the future of personalized flying suits. And I, for one, would be quite happy if there were such suits available in the future. So there you have it. What does the Stormtrooper suit and Tony Stark's Iron Man suit have in common? Quite a lot, actually. They're exoskeleton suits and they can fly, and well, the other thing they have in common is that I really want them to be real. So I hope you guys are going to get working on it, and when you get them made and they're built, be sure to let me know. Okay, Nebula from the Guardians of the Galaxy and Luke Skywalker. They actually have a couple of things in common. Well, the first one is this. They have a bionic connection. Yes, indeed, they have bionic parts on their body. First of all, we know that, well, Luke Skywalker has a bionic hand because he had it chopped off by a lightsaber. And then Nebula is a mixture of biological components or biological parts or normal body mixed in then with, machines which have been put there by someone who I'll mention in a couple of moments. And there is a very interesting fact about these bionic parts that both Nebula have in their body and Luke Skywalker. First off, well, it's Thanos who actually puts these parts into Nebula's body. So that's Thanos, her father. And then with Luke Skywalker loses his hand because his father chopped it off with a lightsaber. See, they've got a lot in common, don't they? There is one other character I should mention before I move on who has a connection with these bionic or prosthetic parts, and that is, of course, Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier. But I'm not going to talk about Bucky Barnes here. I'm going to talk about Nebula, and I'm going to talk about Luke Skywalker. And the question is this: how do Nebula and Luke Skywalker control their bionic parts? Well, they control their bionic parts using their brains. Now, the brain that we have in our bodies, which is kind of the most important organ in terms of controlling everything, is quite extraordinary. Our brain has little things inside it, billions of these things that talk to each other. They create electricity, and these things are called neurons. And when the neurons want to talk to each other, they'll create an electrical signal. It'll be fired towards another neuron, and all of these electrical signals, well, they have a point. They're not just firing off electrical signals for the fun of it, because your body will take these electrical signals and use it then to, well, control your body. So some of the electrical signals are sent to your muscles. Some of them are sent to other parts of your body to get them to do certain things. And these electrical signals, which are super important, help us to control different parts of our body, and they hold the key towards controlling and using bionic implants or bionic prosthetic parts. But before we get into that, let's discover how the brain actually controls and moves parts of the body. Okay, so this is the human brain. It's a very small representation of the brain. The brain is made up of different parts, and they're all color-coded here on this image. You can see at the front of the brain you have the higher mental function parts, and then you have the eye movement section, which is in pink, and then at the back of that image on the right you see vision. I'm more interested here though in the yellow section in the image on the right, and then the blue section on the left. These represent the motor function parts, or the motor cortex parts of the brain. This is the part of the brain that controls limb movement, controls your muscles, controls when you want to walk, when you want to do things, pick things up, etc. So how does it all work? Well, the motor cortex, which is filled with neurons, creates electrical signals, and those electrical signals then are sent through the body via the nervous system. And then these electrical signals will make their way to different parts of the body, such as the arm. And once they get to the arm, for example, and you wanted to move your arm in a certain way, those electrical signals will stimulate the different parts of the arm, such as the muscles and ligaments, in order to get it to move in that particular way. And that's how your brain controls your arm, or controls different parts of your body to get them to move. This is exactly the same process that Nebula and Luke Skywalker would have used to control their arms before they were replaced with bionic prosthetic parts. It just would have worked like that. So, given the fact that Luke Skywalker is missing a hand after the lightsaber incident, and Nebula has had some of her real hands replaced with bionic parts due to some experimentation by her father Thanos, how could they then control their prosthetic arms? Well, let's take a closer look. Back to the example of the arm. So here we have the arm, and we're just going to take a closer look now at how you control the arm and how you could measure even those electrical signals coming from the brain. So the electrical signals will travel through the nervous system, make their way towards the arm, and they'll stimulate the muscles and other parts of the arm in order to get it to move. And we can measure those electrical signals using devices known as electrodes. If they're placed on specific parts of the arm, they can measure the electrical signals at the muscles. To give you a better idea of what these electrodes actually look like, you can see a couple of electrodes here on someone's forearm. Now we can measure those electrical signals using the electrodes, and when you do so, well, you can grab these electrical signals and you could even plot them on a screen. Now this approach is known as electromyography, or EMG, and the idea here with this approach with the electrodes is that you can collect those electrical signals and then use them to control a bionic or prosthetic arm. But how does that control element actually work? Right, we've got these electrical signals that we have collected from the electrodes on the muscles of someone. So how could we actually use these signals to control a prosthetic arm or bionic arm? Well, the thing is, you need to take these electrical signals and you need to send them towards a computer. And that computer will have been taught over many hours how to interpret these electrical signals, what these electric signals mean, and what signals they are carrying in terms of the movement of an arm. And this process could take quite some time in order to achieve. Now, in the case of Luke Skywalker and Nebula, their brains would still be creating those electrical signals for their arms, but their arms aren't there. So they'll send the electrical signals towards the arm and they'll reach perhaps the end part, which would be the stump. But the muscles would still be there, and the muscles might be, for example, in the forearm, or it could be muscles that might be present in the upper arm, would still have the ability to collect those electrical signals and would try to transmit them further, but of course the arm isn't there. So the idea is that you could harness the electrical signals that are coming from maybe the upper arm or from part of the forearm and use them then to control the prosthetic or bionic arm. And that's exactly what people are doing in the real world. And this is a great example of one of these arms. This is the Hero arm from Open Bionics. It is a brilliant piece of technology. It does exactly what I've been mentioning. It collects those electrical signals from the remnants of the upper arm near the stump, takes those electrical signals, interprets them and figures out what the intent is, and then allows the user to control the arm. And basically this is exactly what Luke Skywalker is doing with his arm and what Nebula is doing with the implants in her body. But in Star Wars, for Luke Skywalker anyway, it's really important to be able to use the Force. So what about using the Force with this arm? We've seen not only Luke Skywalker using the Force, of course Darth Vader, and we also see Rey Skywalker also using the Force. So how could they use the Force, those with bionic implants, such as Darth Vader in fact, and Luke Skywalker, when they have a bionic arm? So how would that work? How could they feel things? How could they feel the Force and then be able to use the Force? Because it's one thing to replace the arm and the functionality of the arm. It's another thing then to replace or replicate the sense of touch and haptic feedback, which is the ability to be able to feel vibrations or feedback from things around you. This sensory element is super, super important in order to properly replicate an arm or a replacement bionic or prosthetic. But there is an arm out there that can actually do this. Not only can it replace the functionality of the lost limb, but also gives the user the sensation, the feel of the world around them. And guess what the name of the arm is? You're not going to believe this. The arm is called the Luke arm, which stands for life under kinetic evolution. It is a brilliant piece of technology, a device that not only can replace a lost limb, but also gives that essential sensory feedback to the wearer, something that you don't get with just the bionic prosthetic by itself. This sensory feedback is super important to give the user the impression that they haven't lost a limb. And it's brilliant these technologies are being developed to help those who have lost limbs for various reasons to regain that particular element or part of their body using a very cool piece of technology. So in the case of Nebula and Luke Skywalker, who rely on these technologies, while these technologies have appeared in fictional films, they are very much real and in the real world. Well, you know, this image right here, if you've ever watched the Star Wars film, you've probably seen something like this, right? And I think most of you know what that is. That is the image you see whenever they decide to jump to hyperspace. And in the Star Wars films and in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in fact, they have ways to be able to travel large distances in space very, very quickly. As mentioned, in Star Wars, it is the hyperspace approach, where they jump to hyperspace. But in the MCU, they actually use something else. They use jump points to go from one point in space to another almost instantaneously. And at this point, what I want to look at is the physics of hyperspace and jump points, and to think about, well, you know, is it possible for this to actually take place if you want to shortcut travel across space? To delve into the details of this, well, I have to turn to a very famous physicist for some help, and that is Albert Einstein, one of the greatest physicists that ever lived. And in the 20th century, Albert Einstein developed some astounding theories related to physics. You may have heard of these in terms of general relativity, or the special theory of relativity, which talks about how our universe moves, behaves, how space and time are related, and how we might in fact be able to travel to the future. Now, I'm not going to get into time travel here. Instead, I want to talk about traveling vast distances in space. Now, Albert Einstein united space and time in a thing called space-time. Space, though, is the world around us, and it has dimensions. A line, for example, has one dimension. A square has two dimensions, but a cube has three dimensions. So the objects around us, everything we see around us, is typically three-dimensional, unless it's a really, really thin object or just a dot or something very, very, very small. The fourth dimension, though, in terms of the world we live in, because you might hear some people talking about 4D, for the 4D world. That's three dimensions of space and one dimension which is related to time, and that is a very important dimension in terms of our universe. And Albert Einstein took space and time, united them together to create, well, space-time. And he didn't create space-time, by the way, he just put a name on it. But there might be more dimensions than those 4 dimensions. And in fact, well, they might look something like this, kind of looks like a sponge or Swiss cheese view of what space is. And there is some theories out there that say that the extra dimensions could in fact be hyperspace. Yes, indeed, there are theories out there from physicists who think that hyperspace might actually exist. Now, this would be great news for Chewie from Star Wars and for Steve Rogers, who we saw in the clip flying through space. I'm sure that both of them will be very happy to know that hyperspace might actually be a possibility. But what about light speed? This is something that people talk about as well, not only in films that are related to superheroes or Star Wars, but you might hear it in other things too. And light speed is the idea of, well, could we travel at light speed? But how fast is light? Because the speed of light actually is the speed limit of the universe. Albert Einstein was one of the physicists who demonstrated that this is the case. But how fast is light? Well, light is traveling at roughly around 300 million meters per second, which is an enormous number, just impossible to think about. The Earth, for example, is 150 million kilometers from the sun, but light from the sun takes roughly around 8.3 minutes to travel that distance. It's a huge distance, but because the speed of light is so big, it can do it in just 8.3 minutes. We could never do it in 8.3 minutes. Now, the speed of light crops up in a very famous equation from physics, and that's this one here. E is equal to mc squared, and the c in this equation here is the speed of light. But let me write that out in a little bit more detail, because what it actually says is this, that the energy of an object with some mass m can actually be calculated by multiplying the mass by the speed of light once and then multiplying it by the speed of light one more time. This is what that expression says. It says that energy is equal to mass multiplied by the speed of light multiplied by the speed of light. What it basically says is this: you can take any mass anywhere in the universe and you can convert it potentially into an equivalent amount of energy. That means that apples, the space shuttle, and even woolly mammoths, which all have a mass, also have an equivalent energy. And the energy of all those objects is given by Einstein's equation, E is equal to mc squared. This all sounds fantastic. You might be thinking, great, we can reach the speed of light, perhaps, maybe in the future. Well, a little bit of a problem. You see, Einstein's theories, which were great and helped us to understand the universe, also present a problem with regards to reaching the speed of light. You see, according to Einstein's theories, you need infinite energy in order to get to the speed of light. And last time I checked, getting your hands on infinite energy is, well, one word: impossible. So that might be something that's a little bit problematic for us in terms of the future. So what does that mean then in terms of the options of traveling vast distances across space? Well, hyperspace might actually be possible. But the speed of light, and reaching the speed of light and traveling that fast, I'm going to think, and I'm going to say that that's a no. Sorry. So if you're a little bit disappointed about that, don't be, because the hyperspace option's there. We hope. Well, the physicists hope. They say it's there. There is one other option though, and this option of course goes back all the way to our good friend Albert Einstein. Because when Albert Einstein was working on trying to figure out the universe, he came up with a theory in relation to space-time and united the world of three-dimensional space with time to create this 4D space. And what he also demonstrated was that when you place objects in space-time, they actually create little dents. So in fact, if you were able to see the Earth and the Sun and all the other planets in the solar system on this type of a grid here, they'd actually be making little dents into space-time. Now, if that dent gets big enough, it could actually create a wormhole, which is exactly what we need for one of those jump points that we see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But this, of course, is very much theoretical, as is the hyperspace option. So I've got some bad news for you. Speed of light, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And while I say it's a maybe in hyperspace, it's only in theory. And with the wormhole option, it's also very theoretical too. So I'm sorry to bring you a little bit of disappointing news, but don't fear, we can always just watch the characters in Star Wars jumping into hyperspace and the characters in the MCU using those jump points too. So our mini scientific trip of Star Wars and superheroes is complete. We've taken a look at exoskeleton suits that are worn by Stormtroopers and Iron Man. We've looked at bionic arms and implants that are associated with Luke Skywalker and Nebula. And we've taken a look at the physics behind covering vast distances via hyperspace, or the potential of it anyway, and light speed, which isn't possible, and also wormholes, also theoretical. If you'd like to learn more about what I do, you can check out my YouTube channel, The Superhero Scientist, where you'll find videos in relation to superheroes, Star Wars, Santa Claus, and lots of other topics. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Dr. Barry Fitzgerald, the Superhero Scientist, and delighted once again to be part of Ballinasloe Library's Comic Con. And until I see you next time, always think super.